Before starting any MSB product repair, there are a few crucial tips to keep in mind. When touching any circuit boards or electrical components, it is always best to touch the chassis of the product first, or use an ESD-safe work surface or grounding bracelet to prevent any electrostatic discharge from harming the product. It is important to keep track of all hardware throughout the build process to prevent any loose hardware from getting left inside the unit. Also, keep in mind that there is a variety of hardware used in each product. Some products use soft nylon screws to prevent unwanted electrical connections. These screws are delicate and can cross-thread very easily. Other products have crucial heat-sensitive devices. If over-tightened, they can crack and shorten the life of the product. Pay careful attention to what type of hardware is being used and how it is being used when disassembling your product. Start by flipping the power base onto a padded surface to access the bottom cover. Then use a 7/64 Allen driver to remove the 13 632 cover screws around the edge of the cover. Remove each of the screws and lock washers from the cover. It is crucial to keep track of all your hardware throughout the entire repair process to make sure none can get trapped inside the unit and cause an electrical short. Now, using the two cutouts in the heat sinks, lift the cover free and set it aside. To replace any of the transformers, remove the 1/4-20 bolt in the center of the transformer using a T30 driver. Now unplug the wiring connections for any of the transformers you are trying to remove. For the smaller 4-pin or 2-pin connectors, simply squeeze the tab on the side of the connector and lift. For the larger black connectors, just squeeze both tabs on either end of the connector and lift upwards. Once the connectors are unplugged, you can lift the transformer out of the chassis. The rubber pad below the transformer can sometimes get stuck to the bottom of the transformer. When reinstalling it, place the rubber pad into the cavity before placing the transformer on top. Position the transformer evenly before reinstalling the 1/4-20 bolt with its rubber washer and tightening it using a T30 driver. Now reinstall the black connectors. They should slide in easily and make a crisp clicking noise when fully inserted. Reinstall the smaller white connectors by matching the latching portion on the side of the connector and pushing down till the latch closes and the two bodies meet without a gap. To remove the control board located at the front of the power base, start by unplugging the ribbon cable connecting the front control board to the main motherboard. Then use a 5/16 wrench to loosen the 632 lock nut at the back of the control board and use your hand to spin the nylon 632 screw out a few turns. Use a number 1 Phillips to remove the two 440 screws holding down the ends of the control board. Then you can lift the board free. If the board gets hung up, you may need to loosen the nylon 632 screw a little more. To replace the button, push it back into the unit and then use tweezers to grab it from the back and pull it out. Use the same technique to reinstall the new button. If you are changing the color of your Cascade accent pieces, you can find foot and foot pad replacement instructions at the end of this video. Place the control board back into the pocket with the proper orientation and then hand tighten the nylon screw at the back until the board is held tight. Check to make sure it is fully seated in the pocket by pushing down on the board once the nylon screw is tightened. Use a 5/16 wrench to tighten the 632 lock nut and tension the nylon screw. Do not over-tighten the nut or you will break the nylon screw. It only needs to be snug enough to add tension and hold the screw in place. Reinstall the two 440 screws on either end of the pocket that hold the board. Replace the ribbon cable as shown. To replace the DC power cable, start by using a 22mm wrench to loosen the nut where the connector comes through the jack panel. Now unplug each of the 3 connectors by squeezing the latch and lifting them free. You need to unplug all of the transformer connections as well as the front control board ribbon cable and move them out of the way. Use a number 2 Phillips to remove the 632 shielding connection from the chassis. Push the connector through the jack panel and free the wires inside the unit to get it started. Once the wires are free from the assembly, you will need to remove the nut and locking ring from the wiring harness. To do this, start by pulling each of the 3 cables back through the nut and lock ring until you reach the portion of exposed wires just before the connectors. Once you have the nut and lock ring positioned here, start pushing the connectors back through by starting with the 2-pin connector, then the 3-pin, and lastly the 4-pin. This step can take some time to figure out. Be gentle to avoid cutting into the wires or damaging the connectors. After the nut and lock ring are off, use the same method to get the connectors through the hole in the jack panel. When reinstalling the cable, repeat the technique in reverse order by putting the 4-pin connector in first, followed by the 3-pin, and then the 2-pin. Repeat this again to get the locking ring and nut back onto the cable. Once this is done, finish feeding the cable back through the jack panel and retighten the nut and lock ring using a 22mm wrench. Now arrange the wire through the appropriate areas before reconnecting each of the 3 connectors. Reinstall the smaller white connectors by matching the latching portion on the side of the connector and pushing down till the latch closes and the 2 bodies meet without a gap. Reconnect the control board ribbon cable and each of the 3 transformers. Now reinstall the black connectors. They should slide in easily and make a crisp clicking noise when fully inserted. Use a number 2 Phillips and the 632 screw with its washer to reconnect the shielding wire to the chassis. Finish connecting any remaining wiring harnesses, like the white transformer connectors, if you haven't already done so. Double check all your connection points and that all the wiring is laying as flat as possible. To remove the motherboard, start by using a 1/4-inch socket to remove the green 632 ground screw. Use a number 2 Phillips to remove the 632 screw and lock washer holding down the standby transformer. Then use a number 1 Phillips to remove the 13 440 board screws holding down the motherboard. You will need to disconnect each of the wiring harnesses and move them out of the way to locate all 13 of them. Use a number 2 Phillips to remove the two 632 screws for the AC connector located on the jack panel. Using a 7/64 Allen driver, remove the two 632 nylon screws and lock washers from the cover of the power filters. Remove the cover and set it aside. Using a 3/32 Allen driver, remove the 5 440 device screws and lock washers. Be sure to remove all 5 screws and lock washers. It is very easy for these washers to get stuck in the thermal paste and get trapped below the board. If left here, they can cause a short. Now you can remove the motherboard by gently pulling the connectors clear of the jack panel before lifting it free. Before replacing the board, use non-conductive, non-silicone thermal compound to cover each of the 5 devices on the bottom of the motherboard. It does not require very much. Too much compound is not good for proper heat transfer. Place the motherboard back into the chassis and guide the connectors into the holes in the jack panel. First, fasten the AC connector with the two 632 screws using a number 2 Phillips. This helps pull the board back into alignment and allows you to double check that all the connectors have properly made it back into the appropriate spots in the jack panel. Now use a number 1 Phillips to replace the 13 440 board screws located around the motherboard. Don't forget the lock washer and flat washer on each screw. Use a 3/32 Allen driver to replace the 5 440 device screws and lock washers. Be careful to not lose the washers below the board, as they will cause an electrical short and damage the unit. Also, do not over-tighten these screws or you can crack the devices. Simply tighten them just enough to compress the lock washer and seat the device against the chassis. Use a number 2 Phillips to fasten down the standby transformer using the 632 screw and lock washer, and a 1/4-inch socket to replace the green 632 ground screw and ground wire. Next, replace the plastic cap over the power filters and reinsert the 632 nylon screws and lock washers using a 7/64 Allen driver. Be gentle and do not over-tighten these screws. It is very easy to cross-thread them or break them. You may need to gently reposition the screw or start with a few backwards turns to align the threads properly. Reorganize your wires and reconnect them to the appropriate spots on the motherboard. Then replace the cover and be careful to not break the switches at the front edge of the product. Make sure the lid is laying flat and not pinching any cables, and use a 7/64 Allen driver to reinstall the 13 632 cover screws and lock washers. It is best to start by tightening screws in opposite corners of the lid to ensure an even fit and alignment of the cover. To replace the foot or foot pad, start by using a pair of needle nose pliers to remove the Viton ball at the tip of the foot. Then use a number 14 spanner style driver to loosen the foot using the 2 dimples that can be found inside the tip. Once the foot is off, you can use a 7/64 Allen driver to reach the 632 screw located at the bottom of the exposed hole. Loosen this screw to release the foot pad from the top of the product. When reinstalling the foot pad, orient the pad so that the raised portion is aligned with the heat sinks and the threaded hole is towards the outside edge of the product. Then hold the foot pad in place with one hand while using a 7/64 Allen driver to tighten the screw at the bottom of the foot cavity. After the foot pad is secured, thread the foot back onto the product and use a number 14 spanner style driver to tighten it. Lastly, push the Viton ball back into the tip of the foot and be sure that it is fully seated. Now the unit is ready to be reinstalled in your system.